SEC West balance of power. You know, sometimes you get results like we got last year. And we had LSU kind of come out of nowhere to win they won the division. I don't think this is something that should just be left to history. You know, you remember last year, we all saw it, we all watched what happened. What an outcome, though. And it was a preseason, by the way, this time last year where LSU's win total was like in the, what, Jesse, the 6 or 7 win range. And then all of a sudden, what we call the recalibration of expectation happened, which just means people figured out they were going to be a lot better than the preseason prediction. And so then they adjusted their expectation, which is unfair, because then you go and you lose to A&M, you get drugged by Georgia, and all of a sudden people speak ill of Brian Kelly at the end of the year when they should be saying, Brian Kelly just won how many games in a season where he was barely expected to make a bowl by Vegas? Anyway, so I say all that to say they won the division last year. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means just that. It means LSU's got an SEC Western Division pennant to hang in the facility wherever they want to. That doesn't mean that they're the top program in the West. And that's what this is kind of about. It's not about team. Team is just a one-year snapshot of program. Remember, kids, a program, as we define it on this show, is kind of a 3-4-ish year rolling snapshot of where you are. Obviously, that gets changed wholesale when you make a coaching change. So where is the SEC West right now? Let me be clear. Or as Corrine Brown would have said once upon a time on the House floor, let me be clear. There is no doubt where this division still runs through. It still runs through Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Last year was last year. We saw what happened. A couple of close losses by Alabama. It's happened before. Believe it or not, revisionist history notwithstanding, Saban doesn't always win the West. They don't always win the SEC. It also doesn't mean things have completely come off the rails. Now, it does feel a little different right now, doesn't it? And that's where I get a lot of you guys going back and forth with me. It's my most fun activity of what casuals would call the offseason. And that is, I have a lot more time to converse with you. You see me do it on Twitter. I do it a ton in the YouTube comments. And the thing I keep hearing about Alabama is, well, yeah, granted, Josh, they've lost the West before, but it just feels different, doesn't it? How so? Well, you continue, it feels different because they hired Tommy Rees and Kevin Steele. Normally, Nick Saban has world-class coordinators. True. I'll even grant you that. It's not like I was sitting here pounding my fist on this table in December saying, you know what Bama's missing? They're missing, Kevin Steele and who on offense? Tommy Rees. In fact, I would challenge Alabama fans. If I were to tell you guys in November, or I asked you in November, what do you think about Kevin Steele? What do you think about Tommy Rees? You probably would have trashed one or both of them. You certainly never would have said, oh, they're Bama material. Built by Bama, baby. And then all of a sudden Saban hires them, and you have to make good with the idea that, man, maybe they are the right guys for the job, respectively. I've told you my theory is I think Saban could have hired 30 different guys, and if the team is wired the right way mentally, they'll be fine because they have the best ingredients in the country with which to cook. But I do also understand when you come back at me and say, okay, yeah, but that's a bunch of unknown, and kind of looked wobbly last year. Defenses looked wobbly. And the overall structure of the team, you keep mentioning mentally, it looks a little wobbly. I get it. However, you're judging Alabama on the Bama standard. I'm judging them against everyone else. And there is no one who has come fractionally close to putting up the extended track record that Nick Saban has and Alabama has. So it would take several, quote-unquote, down years for me to change my mind on that. By the way, their down years still saw them win 10 games in the regular season. So there's that. I also look around the SEC West. You know, this division has won the SEC 12 of the last 15 years. But do you remember how that split goes? Bama's won 7 of them. LSU's won 3. Auburn's won 3. That's it. There is no Arkansas in there. There is no Texas A&M in there. So how does this shake out behind Alabama? This is where my friends in Baton Rouge are sitting there. They're just eyes wide open. They're waiting because I know you guys. And you probably wouldn't argue that your program has surpassed Alabama quite yet, but you expect to be mentioned right behind Alabama. And you know what? You should, because there you are. You're right behind Alabama. Now, ironically, I think that is so open and shut a case, I don't have a lot to say about LSU, only because I don't have doubts about LSU. Spoken my piece on Brian Kelly, spoke my piece when he was hired. I haven't changed my tune a second. Some of the rest of the country has. I haven't. So I got what I thought I would get with Brian Kelly. I'm getting and will continue to get, at least my prediction is, what I expect to get with LSU. They're going to be up there every year. And if there is an extended period of time where someone would challenge Alabama in the divisional structure, it would be them. It's kind of a moot point because we got one more season of divisions and then divisions are scrapped. So this is the last time we'll really have this kind of preseason conversation. Brian Kelly's not the key figure here, only because I think we've got him figured out on this show. And I think if you don't already have him figured out, you soon will. He's going to be there every year. LSU will be there every year. The key picture, well, not the key picture, the key figures, ironically enough, in the SEC West second and third tier has nothing to do with what's happening in Baton Rouge. It's what's happening in College Station, Texas, and it's what's happening in Auburn, Alabama. Hugh Freeze and Jimbo Fisher are the most important figures in the SEC West. I know Saban's program's at number one. I know Brian Kelly and LSU are going to be a mainstay. I have no clue what I'm going to get from A&M. I don't know yet what to expect from Hugh Freeze and Auburn. The reason I mention those two is because history has shown us Auburn has the ability to win this thing. Auburn has the ability to play for national championships when they have things right over there. History has not shown us Texas A&M does that, but logic tells us Texas A&M should be able to do that because there is no resource you need to have to do those sorts of things that A&M hasn't had. They've just been a woefully underachieving program for decades. That's not my fault. That's just the way it is, Bruce Hornsby. And so now you look now moving forward, and I think either one of them could pull it off. But the thing about it is, and the reason it's so shrouded in mystery, especially with Texas A&M, is because Texas A&M has shown regression over the past 2 years. I mean, Auburn fired a coach. They got a brand new coach in there. And the early off-the-field returns when it comes to talent acquisition have been good for Jimbo, or not for Jimbo Fisher, for Hugh Freeze and Auburn. But, you know, they'll tee it up this fall, and the Hugh Freeze era will start there. The Jimbo Fisher era is over half a decade in at Texas A&M. And things have gotten worse over the past few years. So they made the old offensive coordinator adjustment. They've got plenty of talent out there. We know all that. I mean, that's like beating a dead horse by July. Everyone said that a million times. But the balance of power will largely be determined by whether those moves pay off. And the balance of power in the West will largely be determined by whether Hugh Freeze kind of, boom, just like pops an immediate 8-win season on you out of nowhere, 9-win season. If it's ever going to happen, it happens at Auburn. Not the University of Auburn, Auburn University. It happens down there. The next group, to me, when it comes to the balance of power in the SEC West, I dropped my pen. Just fumbling things. I think behind those, you've got Arkansas. You got Ole Miss. I almost put Mississippi State in a different compartment. I'll talk about them in a second. Arkansas and Ole Miss, until things change, I always think of as being in a tier where I am not going to expect them to win the division, or haven't. Division's about to go away. But they certainly could impact who does and who doesn't. Now, transfer portal, we're still too young in that era to know how those programs will look a decade in to that era. Likewise with NIL. I know it feels like we're into it now, but we're only a few years into it. Someone's profile, when it comes to portal combined with NIL, is going to evolve like 70 or 80% from what it is now. We're still that early on in the process. And so is that Arkansas? Is that Ole Miss? I'll tell you, I think Ole Miss, I've told you this before, I think Ole Miss is kind of at the forefront of a lot of what the second and third tier programs out there are finding things or ways to do in the NIL. I do believe that about them. So that's where I think those are. Mississippi State, very interesting case study. They're coming off their best year that they've had in quite a while. They've got a returning quarterback that everyone should be talking about in Rodgers, but hardly anyone does talk about because they just think of him as a product of the Mike Leach offense, which is okay because a lot of his numeric success has to do with being associated with Mike Leach. But now, because of what happened there, Arnett takes over as head coach. And they're going to have SEC Media Days up here in a couple of weeks. I wish I could put a prop bet on how many times that guy's going to be asked, well, what changes now that you're a defensive coach? What's the offense going to look like now? I'll let him answer that for you. They got a pretty good team over there. You know, there are a lot of teams out there with bigger brand names that have far lower season win totals than the Mississippi State Bulldogs. What they're going to be moving forward, though, I think it's impossible to know because you've got a guy that's been thrust into being an SEC head coach that was not expected by anyone to be an SEC head coach in 2023. That's not to knock the guy's ability. It's just obvious. And so that balance of power is still Bama at the top. It's LSU right behind them. It didn't take them long to reclaim that spot. LSU could absolutely over time challenge for that top spot. And that also coincides with wondering, whether Bama's going to return to an elite status this year. But that Auburn and Texas A&M layer of the cake, that's going to be the most fascinating thing to watch in the West this year, in the 1 year that we have the West left.